Hello viewers and welcome to Africa, the continent of hope. Now, communication has been a tool when it comes to dissemination of information, and to the point that also communication sometimes bears its own barriers. And today we are lucky to have none other than Mr. Johnson, Edmond, who's been working for longer years at the African Union Commission, and he's also going to explain to us the work that he does. Welcome, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you very much.
Pleased to host you in this discussion.
Thank you.
Maybe you can introduce yourself and the work that you do.
Well, my name is Edmond Oladipo Johnson. I'm a conference interpreter. She said I've been working for years. Yes, I started working for the AU in the early 2000s, and I'm still helping to disseminate information continent-wide, meaning that I've been to African Union meetings across the continent, wherever it was necessary for us to go, and then on these days online too. So we bridge the communication gap, so to say, by doing that.
So if you don't mind me asking, how many languages do you translate or rather interpret? And while at that, I also understand that there's always a big difference or rather a gap between interpretation and translation, which many people do not seem to understand the difference.
Yes, indeed, there is a difference between translation and interpretation. Translation has to do with the processing of documents. Documents are produced in a specific source language and have to be translated into the language of the other user, the other language user. Whereas interpretation is still processing from one language to another, from a source language, which can be French, Arabic, Spanish, Portuguese, into another target, what we call target language, which is English, and vice versa. The source language could be English. Now, interpretation even has a subdivision. You know, you can have what most of us practice here at the AU is simultaneous interpretation. That is, you are in a conference environment. There are speakers from different language background, different source languages, to speaking for you, for some of us, interpreters, to put it in to the target language according to the needs. Now, in an environment like the African Union environment, where there are about 5 languages that are working languages, French, English, Portuguese, Arabic. Now, Swahili and Spanish have just been added, making 6 languages during the summit. Now, at such meetings, the participants are free to speak in the language in which they feel comfortable. But those who are listening will listen in their choice language. The speaker from the floor might be speaking Arabic, but a listener wants to get it in English, another one wants to get it in French, another one wants to get it in Portuguese. So for that purpose, we have a team. It's not just 2 interpreters, because usually we can have 2 interpreters in a booth. In such large meeting, you have a team that can be made up of 2 interpreters per language unit.
Okay.
Sometimes 3, depending on the need. And then when the language, from the source language, if the interpreter who gets it from the source language cannot deliver to the target language of all the participants, obviously somebody has to come in between. So we have what we call a relay interpreting. So the message will come in Arabic. The interpreter will take it from Arabic into either French or English. And then another interpreter will take from that midway delivery French or English, depending on the arrangement, internal arrangement of the team, to deliver it in the desired target language. So that is how it works.
Okay, that's interesting. So which means each language has its own interpreter.
Each language, at a large meeting, a big meeting like the summit, each language will have about a minimum of 2 or 3 interpreters, depending on the importance of the length of the meeting and everything. 3 interpreters per booth. It's very important because some people will want to say, no, 2 people can manage. It's not ideal. And if there is any breakdown due to maybe an incident, health incident or something else, and you have only 2 interpreters, then you have a crisis. So ideally, you should have, for such big meetings, as summits, you should have 3 interpreters.
Okay, that's interesting. So has there been any awkward situation since you've been interpreting and translating for years? Like something probably maybe when one person is translating or maybe interpreting, right?
Yes.
So when one person is interpreting, has there been some sort of collision where someone else is interpreting and it's disseminating information differently?
Well, these days, such incidents are due to technical issues, because as I have explained, it's not always a direct process of transmission. It goes through a second party, or let me say third party, the second party being the tag, a third party. And then it depends on how the third party receives the message. Sometimes, particularly these days of virtual meetings through internet, there might be breakdown in the sound. But when it's physical, there are little possibilities of hitches.
So amongst the many challenges that we usually have when we are disseminating information, we have the barrier itself to communication, given that we have very various languages in Africa. What are some of the challenges that you have encountered in terms of interpretation?
Well, as an interpreter, you cannot say that, the variety of subjects constitutes a barrier. Ideally, the interpreters should be given adequate background information about the meeting they are going to cover. The interpreter will prepare the meeting, get information through the documentation provided, and then maybe additional external browsing and everything. So if you are prepared, the challenges are reduced. It's not reduced to basic knowledge of the subject matter. That is a challenge if it's a technical meeting or if it's a meeting on the subject that people are not very conversant or that the interpreter is not conversant with, and you don't provide adequate background information. If he doesn't have time to go and do the research himself, then there will be maybe some gaps in his knowledge of the subject matter. And then there's also the challenge of the nature of the type of speakers that it's not all speakers that will be smooth, clear, you have, like even taking English language, even the English people will tell you when you look at dictionary or online information, there are varieties of English, but you have to be able to cope with that variety. And also, of course, the interpreter also maybe is speaking one variety of English, one register of English that all the participants are not conversant with.
When you speak about the nature of an interpreter, what are some of the other qualifications that are there for you to be eligible to be an interpreter?
Well, these days, after the basic university education, it's advisable that one goes to a school of interpretation. Yes. But many interpreters even go after the basic degree. They do technical training, you know, on the job training and everything.
Something like an internship?
Yes, because they have, you know, a background that is even outside linguistics, because many interpreters started by studying the languages, French, English, Spanish, whatever. But if you have, in addition to that, if you have some knowledge or some studies in maybe economics or law, you know, all those things are helpful. Depends on the type of organization you're going to work for. In Africa, we are still more or less working in a general environment, no specialization. But in the northern countries, they tend to get specialization. You can be a legal interpreter, a medical interpreter, you know.
Okay.
There's some other maybe technology,
Tourism.
you know.
Okay. So basically there are various sectors in which someone can actually interpret in.
Yes.
So for example, in the case of a peace and security issue, how would interpretation complement the work of peace and security interpretation?
Well, it goes a long way to complement the work of peace and security, because what you are looking for in peace and security is bridging the gap of understanding between the parties. And that's why it's very important to have interpreters who are versatile, who can quickly adapt to the situation, who can research deeply in
the security issues.
In security issues. Because maybe you are talking about two countries that have conflict. The interpreters, beside the documents that are given to him, is supposed to have shown interest in knowing something about the background of that incident, that conflict, or you know, the situation in that region, and what are the main issues, what are the drivers of the conflict, what are the efforts that have been deployed. Generally, the interpreter has a lot of reading work, background reading work to do. To be a successful interpreter, you are always on your toes. You need to continuously update your knowledge about, you know,
various
events
issues.
Yeah.
So you can be prompt when it comes to interpreting?
Yes, so that, you know. And then again, peace and security is a very delicate area of interpretation. Because it has been said that, you know, interpreters can cause countries to go to war.
Wow.
If, you know, the message is wrongly transmitted, the countries can go to war. And you have difficult situations where maybe the speaker is virtually, quote unquote, abusing the other the other partner, the other interlocutor, saying harsh words. I'm not going to take it. It's not, you know, this is rubbish. The interpreter will have to know how to tone it to an acceptable. Because if he says you are just a stupid man and you too repeat you are stupid, then communication breaks down. And they will never say, because you see, some people listen only in the target language. So nobody will realize, few people will realize that it is not the fault of the interpreter, but the party who you know, said harsh words will say, no, I didn't say that. That's the fault of the interpreter. So the interpreter is always the whipping boy in this type of situation.
No, that's quite funny, because I can see the seriousness of that matter. And maybe allow me to ask you, so let's take, for example, two states that are in conflict with each other. So they will take those probably two interpreters from the same member states, of course, because they'll be avoiding what you just stated right now. They will be interpreting maybe just to cause conflict on the other side.
Yeah, well, the cases I've witnessed, usually it is an organization, such like the African Union, or some regional organization, ECOWAS, that provide, the platform for negotiation between the parties.
Okay.
So they have their in-house interpreters who master the art of interpretation and who, are one principle in interpretation, confidentiality. You are not supposed to disclose the subject of your discussion. And you have to be mindful of the importance of what you say. You cannot just be flippant. Whatever the parties are saying, you have to weigh the words and say it in a way that would be acceptable to any reasonable observer or listener. So it doesn't matter even if your country is one of the countries involved in the conflict, you are not going to distort the message. You are not allowed to distort the message. And after the meeting, you are not allowed. You are not expected to go and be discussing what transpired during the meeting with outsiders. It is not.
Does that mean that the interpreter has to go through due diligence before they are accepted or rather eligible for that interpretation?
Yeah. Interpreters that are members of the International Association of Conference Interpreters have signed up to that oath, and well, not oath, but they have been somehow, like you call it, gone through due diligence. They have been mentored by older interpreters who have seen that they are practicing according to the rules. For instance, issues of confidentiality, punctuality, and so many other details that show that this is a serious interpreter. So that happens.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Mr. Johnson. What is your word of advice for that person who would love to join interpretation? There may be that young person who really wants that insight, or rather that, the advice on joining interpretation.
Yeah.
What will you tell them?
Well, first, you have to be very much interested in practicing that, because it's not any bilingual person or even trilingual person that can interpret. You have to be keen on being an interpreter and then develop the skills. You develop the skills by maybe going for the sort of technical training, do something on interpretation techniques where they teach you the ropes of the practice, and then there are national and international associations that try to promote, the development of the profession, that promote the development of the profession through some training programs.
All right.
And so on.
Okay, thank you. So we can be confident to say that there also could be some missing links between institutions and actually learning institutions and employing institutions. There could be a missing link, right? What is it that the institutions for learning are not implementing that is applied in the larger institutions that offer employment?
No, the learning institutions, the School of Interpretations and the universities, try to prepare the students or the people to be employable. So there shouldn't be any missing link. There's no missing link in as much as the interpreter is interested in becoming, the person is interested in becoming an interpreter.
Yes.
The school will teach you a few, principles of interpretations and everything, and then you have to continue to train yourself on the job. And then, there are not as many employers as there are schools, so many of us operate on what we call the freelance market. So independent market, where is your practice, your competence, your knowledge of the institutions that determine your survival on the market.
All right. Okay. Thank you so much. So is there anything else you would like to add during this interview?
No, this interview. Well, I thank you for showing this interest in knowing what goes on behind the scene, because interpreters are usually heard, not seen. So this is a world. We are heard, we are not seen. We are operating from, I like to call it cage, you know, going back to your cage, and then, but your voice can go to the end of the world, because these days, what is happening increasingly after COVID, what COVID brought to us is not just that health pandemic and crisis, but also a sort of rethinking of the way business is going on in the world. Many institutions these days, including the African Union, have decided that it's maybe cheaper and not so bad to hold your meeting virtually. Delegates might find it difficult to all assemble in one spot. So countries have decided that no, we are not coming physically, but we will be connected. So at every meeting, because of that virtual possibility, virtual connection, you can have an attendance of over 100 participants listening to what is going on, unlike when you have a physical meeting where, you know, each country struggles to send 2 delegates and times 55 or 56 African countries. So you hardly can have 50 delegates coming to the meeting. But with virtual meetings, you have a larger participation of the countries.
Thank you so much, Mr. Johnson, for joining us during this interview. And of course, being Africa, the continent of hope, we are really touched by the work that you're doing as an interpreter, both interpreter and translation. And of course, it serves as hope for the African community, because you're disseminating information to people who cannot hear a particular language. So of course, you're bridging the gap between A and B, and of course to Z. So thank you so much. And you have something else to add? Okay.
No, when you talk about bridging the gap, it occurred to me that, okay, we are not communicating only to those who can listen to our voices. Increasingly, you have sign interpretation.
Oh yeah, of
When
course.
you have a big event, there will be sign interpreters. So trying to widen the scope of the audience that you are trying to reach. So
does it mean that you do the sign interpretation?
Yeah, sign. This is an area where you specialize.
Could you maybe do some small?
No. I don't know any sign at all.
Okay.
I don't know any
sign. But you work with
there are
those who do the
interpreters
sign.
that are trained to do sign interpreting.
Okay.
That's what I'm saying.
All right.
You see, in Africa, maybe that's the only dimension that we have added to an area of specialization.
Okay.
In the north, you will specialize as maybe legal interpreter, technology interpreter, medical interpreter, translator. So there's more specialization over there. But here we are still general.
Okay. Well, that's really good to know. Thank you so much for that, Mr. Johnson. And of course, it has been a pleasure to host you in our show. This has been your show, Africa, the Continent of Hope. See you soon.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.